He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests. He's Alex Marlow, and this is The Alex Marlow Show.
All right, welcome to The Alex Marlow Show. I got a treat for you today. We go long form with Mike Benz. We go into all of the various funding mechanisms that could be funding Trantifa terror online, as well as his reflections on his friend, Charlie Kirk, who he was a regular on Charlie's podcast. And it's good to catch up with Mike, who's one of the smartest, most productive people we have in journalism and activism, and was a close friend of Charlie's. I originally was hoping today I would get to focus on the news that Jimmy Kimmel has, in the process of, it looks like, getting fired, though he could potentially come back on ABC for his no doubt low-rated and money-losing late-night show. I guess I don't know for sure, but I would assume it loses a lot of money after what we learned about Colbert. But I'll have to say that I'll give more commentary on that tomorrow. But I am firing off some X posts on it, and just noting that the FCC, first of all, didn't do anything here. This was all market forces, because Kimmel went out there and he smeared MAGA, essentially smearing Charlie himself, blatantly lying about Charlie. I played the clip on the show, and lying about the people responsible for his murder. And then he mocked Donald Trump, which was part of the clip that I didn't play because I thought it was inconsequential at the time, but turned out to be quite consequential. Then he mocked Donald Trump for the way he was grieving his friend. And they were close. They were good friends. And so to lie about someone who has a young man who had just been murdered publicly, and then to mock the people who are mourning him, there's no market force that requires that to be allowed on the airwaves. And these ABC affiliates, yes, they're subject to the FCC, but they're also subject to these syndicators that put them on these local TV networks. We're talking about Nexstar. We're talking about Sinclair. Sinclair is a conservative company, and they've been very tolerant of Kimmel, and they keep putting them on their platforms. So Sinclair is going to actually put a Charlie Kirk a tribute on, I think, tomorrow night on their stations. But the bottom line is the FCC can fine hosts or punish hosts or stations or networks for airing swear words, for airing words like shit and words like tits. You can get a fine. So it's not like you have unlimited free speech rights. So you can get dinged for a lot of stuff. Ask anyone who's ever been on the airwaves on radio. We're not talking about satellite or podcasts, but just radio, like my colleagues at Salem Radio. FCC can ding you for all sorts of stuff. So there is all sorts of limitations on pure freedom from the FCC. And if you're going to act obscene, as Kimmel is doing, then Brendan Carr, the FCC chair, has a right to say something. But he didn't do anything. The person who did stuff was the companies that did stuff was Nexstar and Sinclair, who were syndicating Kimmel, and they said we've had enough of syndicating this filth and pumping it into homes, particularly in some of these communities that are the ones that are holding the spontaneous vigils for Charlie. And they go on, they turn on TV, and they're hearing lies that he was killed by a MAGA guy and not a Trantifa terrorist. So all that's great, and it's a positive development. It's not cancel culture, but even if it was, I wouldn't care. And I'll opine on this a little bit later on, probably in greater detail tomorrow. But they completely destroyed the internet advertising business, the entire business. I wrote about this in Breaking the News. To destroy Breitbart. They were so mad about Breitbart's effectiveness in the 2016 election that they upended the entire business model of online news specifically to try to cancel us. It was worth it to risk everything. They risked it all in terms of online publishing because they wanted to make it so toxic for people to be able to make money doing what we were doing at Breitbart, which was reporting the facts in a way that was not sanctioned or codified by the New York Times and the Associated Press. So they've always had this streak where they don't like conservatives to report accurate information that could suit our narratives politically, and they think it's perfectly acceptable for Democrats to lie and smear people so long as it does suit their political narratives. That's what it's all about. Jake Tapper was quick to point out that maybe Nexstar is trying to get some sort of a merger deal, but these media companies are always doing some sort of a merger, and I don't think Sinclair is doing anything like that right now, and Sinclair also doesn't need to take their cues from the FCC when it comes to firing Kimmel. They would love to fire him anyway, I'm sure. So they don't want him on their air anymore because he's a toxic person, and he's incredibly nasty to the exact viewers who make these stations possible. And that's fine. It's completely fine with me. In fact, it's great, and I'm happy about it. So we'll see. The Sinclair's demanding a big apology. Let's see if Kimmel does it. I'm actually connected in Kimmel world. I will opine on this tomorrow on the show. And I've got friends who are close to Kimmel, or at least were in recent years. And there's a possibility he comes crawling back. It's much like a cockroach. It's hard to absolutely get rid of some of these people in the broadcasting sense. But we'll keep a close eye on it. But the bottom line is he's off the air, and now the left is leading a boycott of ABC Disney. And for all of our hard work exposing their China ties and their leftism and their wokeism and their grooming, it took them putting Jimmy Kimmel on ice to get the left out to say we're going to boycott Disney now, which is just surreal. Charlie Kirk doing us another solid from beyond the grave. Just amazing. He's not even in the grave yet. He's already doing this extra good. Amazing guy that Charlie helped us pull this off. What a legend. All right. So we'll bring in Mike Benz now, and I will have much more for you on Charlie and on Kimmel and more of the news tomorrow. But this is a important conversation. I think you're going to dig it. All right. Mike Benz is with me. I always love speaking to Mike. Hopefully you're in a safe spot, Mike. You're definitely one of the people I thought of when they started hunting us. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to respond. I hope you're taking care of yourself. I know it's an odd sentiment, but one I feel like I feel compelled to express. But you were close with Charlie. You're regular on his show. I interviewed you on his show in the past. You've got the floor. You're 30,000 foot.
Oh, it's insane. It's tragic at a level that's hard to process. The scale of the damage is incalculable in terms of just the force that Charlie was. I have no doubt in my mind Charlie Kirk was going to be president of the United States at some point in the next 10, 20, 30 years. It was almost inevitable. He was a singular figure. TPUSA, which he built with his own hands from the ground up as a kid, was the largest boots on the ground operation in the 2024 election. It was singularly responsible for turning, I think for the first time in decades, the young demographic, young men tilted for the Republican Party, because Charlie Kirk built 3,500 college chapters of TPUSA, which completely changed the game. Before that, there was only college Republicans, which was a joke. But TPUSA built community, built solidarity, built networks, built leadership training, built confidence, built a leadership pipeline. And it was a boots-on-the-ground operation for mobilizing. And not only that, Charlie had a gift of the gab and wasn't just a behind-the-scenes institution builder, but he could take on 25 people at a time. I think his Jubilee video going against 25 leftists had 35 million views on YouTube. He never lost his cool, never lost his composure. I never saw him lose a fight. He was just a singular figure. And for him to be assassinated in broad daylight, mid-sentence, in front of thousands of people in probably the most graphic 4K HD video footage I've ever seen in my life of someone having their life stolen from them. I mean, I've never even seen an ISIS video that graphic. And for that to happen so suddenly, I think this is a history-changing event. It literally changed history in the sense that we were robbed of a future president, and it takes somebody that everyone can trust in order to build these kind of coalitions. Charlie was the bridge builder. We learned last week he actually brokered the MAGA Maha union by convincing Donald Trump and RFK to team up together last year, and convincing RFK to take the HHS. I mean, I could go on forever on this, but now is the moment to make things bigger and brighter than ever.
Yeah, there are always these things that Charlie would do, because I've known him for such a long time, and I was always you sometimes catch yourself thinking, well, how could you do that too? He does so much other stuff well, and then you think, well, it's Charlie, he'll figure it out. And so you hear things like how he was going to basically single-handedly make sure that we're turning ballots in It's with his Chase the Vote effort for the last election. And you think, well, I mean, he's got the campus activism. He's a big radio show. How's he going to, he's doing all these big events. Like, how's he also going to make sure everyone turns in their ballot? And then he did. And they were on the ground and all like overnight. They were just standing up a huge grassroots effort. And then I heard he was basically vetting people to staff the government. And, he was calling me and he said that, yeah, I'm placing people in the, the national security side of the government, the Pentagon right now, and getting my take on a few things. I'm like, is this a real conversation? And then, of course, it's a real conversation. That's who Charlie was. And he was that networked and that robust, and he had that clarity, and he always knew who to talk to and which opinions to seek out. And that's something that he was also not just an educator, but he was a learner. He was really important. It was important to him to fortify himself with the smartest people, the people who could add to his base of knowledge. And that spirit is it is irreplaceable. And you flagged something that's really important in there with the Jubilee video, because we're in this moment, Mike, where there's this Thunderdome approach to debate where people only like this. We don't have any polite conversations. We only have these debates like you see on Abby Phillips' show on CNN or, Piers Morgan's show, and both of which I think are interesting models for infotainment. Really interesting for a lot of ways, but it's really hardcore. And Charlie was great at that. And he was great at the polite stuff too, which he would do on campus, but he was also great at that sort of rambunctious debate too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was the Iceman. He was completely unflappable. He was completely, a blow never landed verbally, and I can't imagine at 6'5" physically without an assassin's bullet with a coward's sniper rifle. But the fact is you mentioned something that I used to talk about all the time. I consider myself a total workaholic, and morning, noon, night, the stuff like you, it's just, it's in our blood to just never have an off button. And for a long time, when people would bring that up, I would say, well, there's one person in this movement who works harder than me. That's Charlie Kirk. Imagine doing everything that I'm doing. And then, you have your public speaking, your streaming or radio show, you have your journalism, you have your network, and then you have to run an a massive national and institution. You have to. Everyone's posting their DMs with Charlie, and it's like he had 70. One of these Trump-like figures. It's like you read chapter 1 of Art of the Deal, and it's like wake at 6 a.m. Made a call to this guy. About a deal here, made a 6:15. My second call is to an old golfing buddy, and we caught up on, what's happening in New York, right. Real estate. We made it 6:30, and you realize this guy's made 100 calls before you even woke up in the morning.
That's right.
But it takes that in order to build such a broad and deep network of trust that you can be entrusted with the power broker, with the network building, with the long-term strategy, because everybody liked Charlie. And Charlie not only kept lines of communication open between very opposing sides of the MAGA movement from the beginning of this, until the day they stole his life, but because he was such a positive and unflappable force, it's like everybody could talk to him. And that is something, history really is a great man of history thing, much more than systems and institutions. Those things wrap around the will of towering men or women who have who've done that process that Charlie lived for enough months, years, decades, that eventually millions of people move to the tune or music that's set by that singular force. I think that's how Trump operated from his 20s until through his 70s, and that's how Charlie Kirk operated from 15, 16 years old up until the age of 31. And that's not something that can be trained. That's not something that can be taught. You have it. You have that fire, and you have that peculiar set of traits, or you don't. And I was very, very concerned in the immediate aftermath that unless everyone banded together in solidarity and institutionalized at a deeper level what Charlie was doing, that sort of thing could not be replaced by an individual. What we are seeing, though, I'm very heartened to see 40,000 new chapter applications.
Yeah.
If, by that math.
And it'll only go up from there. It'll be on every continent where there are human
If you have a
beings living.
TPUSA chapter in every high school in America, that would, the lengths that would go to solve the college radicalization process, because people are pre-inoculated from that BS before they even get there, I think would be totally game-changing, and I pray that moves forward.
Okay, so let's talk. I want to be specific here about where you think we need to go in terms of fighting back. And there's going to be some of this will be positive change that we know we should be making, and some of this will be institutional rot we need to stamp out. And you just prompted me to start at education. So we need to have an educated populace. But the school systems are broken. The primary and secondary schools have been broken by the teachers union, and the universities have been broken by Marxists and left-wing donor infrastructure and the federal government, et cetera. So what do we do? Because Charlie, again, he was a deeply educated guy who never went to college. That's the model, but there's going to be people who want to be doctors and lawyers, et cetera, who do need to go to a college and get a certification. We're in trouble here if we can't solve this one.
Yes, we need to take the fight in terms of political activism to the colleges and universities. You can't lose sight of the fact that Charlie was murdered in broad daylight at a college campus, the very place that opposed him so heavily, the very milieu that he built his institutions in, that directly challenged the power structure of those universities. And I think what the Trump administration has been doing in terms of conditioning federal grant money on reform of the college university campuses has to be massively upscaled at this point. There were billions of dollars in grant money was cut from Harvard University, as you and I talked about earlier this summer. Yeah, and the same process has been playing out on at dozens of major universities. I think that has to continue at a threefold pace. And I think that, frankly, to the extent that there is a federal government funding mechanism of colleges and universities, that it has to condition that money appropriately. This is taxpayer money that's paying for it. It can't go to institutions that host professors who endorse political violence. We've seen complete disproportionate. I think there's a grid that's been put together by an account called Charlie's Murderers on X that has just compiled, I think it's up to 100,000 folks celebrating Charlie's death. And there was a demographic breakdown by profession. And the number one demographic celebrating Charlie's murder has been teachers and professors, I think, followed by people in the public health profession. And that right there is a roadmap to the purse strings for funding. There should be no dollars to any university who hosts any professor who endorses political assassination.
I just want to emphasize that point. That is so profound, that the biggest group are teachers. The people who are educating the next generation are the biggest group of people who celebrated the public, and you noted the public nature of it, which I'm going to get there in a second, because in the hyper online age, he wasn't just murdered, he was publicly slaughtered on 4K video for everyone to watch. And I think that's another big culture shift. But that is very profound, about the teachers and professors being the most likely group to celebrate.
Yes, by professional demographic. And at first that statistic is shocking, and then you think about it and you remember, oh yeah, that's how things got this bad. Yeah. Because it's a captive audience. If you want a high-paying job, this is the bottleneck that everybody gets cookie cutter squeezed through. I myself feel like I was radicalized in college, and I went to a pretty good one. I remember I didn't know what I was coming into it. Mm-hmm. I had a very liberal friend group and Shabbat club and everything growing up, and I didn't feel like I fully fit in there, but I didn't know what I was, and I was afraid to call myself conservative, so I tried to sort of hedge as a conservative liberal or something to that effect. And then just seeing the insanity of college campuses. This is in 2002 to 2006. And the professors, I mean, it was complete. I didn't know what right was, but I knew what wrong was. And that was what I was being taught in college. And the techniques that were used to try to silence students who asked the wrong questions in class or who tried to exert influence on student institutions. And I can only imagine how bad that got in the following 2 decades in the era of, that's before the word woke, came out, before BLM and these Antifa groups institutionalized at the level that they have. But a lot of this, I think, it can be done domestically through control over the purse strings at places like the National Science Foundation, the Department of Education, NIH, DARPA, the State Department, USAID. All of these different government agencies spend millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. I mean, the National Science Foundation alone is $10 billion a year to colleges and universities. And there should be a litmus test around non-incitement to political assassination in broad day. I mean, that's 101 type stuff. Can you imagine the Biden administration funding a Hillsdale College or something especially while someone's on payroll there, endorsing the assassination of a Democrat president or high-level political figure? There's not a snowball's chance in hell. And these institutions are entirely dependent on federal government funding, not just at the direct level, but even indirectly through subsidization of student loan programs and the like. All of this, I'm grateful that the Trump administration has pursued that strategy, really for the first time, I would argue, since the 1950s, that the executive branch. I haven't always agreed with the premise at which they've pursued it, but I think the door is now open. The political will is there. The mandate is completely necessary to ensure this country doesn't break out in civil war. And I think that that's a very powerful lever. And in addition, on the international side, you look at these groups like Antifa and Trantifa, the kind of trans Antifa side of it. And I've been making the case now for many, many years that these groups are global networks, global affinity networks who are tied at the hip to U.S. foreign policy. And we even just saw this right now. The FBI is probing this group called Armed Queers Salt Lake City. And
this is exactly where I wanted to go with you. This group's been on my radar from the second we heard about Charlie's assassination, and I've not done a deep dive yet. So I just want to make sure the audience to listen up. Go ahead, Mike, roll.
So, the facts are still unfolding in this. What we've been told by the FBI is that they are investigating links between the assassin, Tyler Robinson, as well as other of his friendship networks with potential foreknowledge of the assassination within these Discord and Steam group chat and communities online associated with this Armed Queer Salt Lake City group. And I made I saw a banner by this group saying the revolution will not be voted in. Join armed queers. And I made a quip on X that there's one thing faster than the speed of light, and that is the speed at which the FBI would descend on any right-wing gun group that calls for armed revolution instead of voting. This is the sort of thing that there has been a culture of federal agents and informants infiltrating right-wing group chats so that on the right side of the aisle, nobody comes close to saying anything like what Destiny said on Piers Morgan, that if you didn't want Charlie Kirk assassinated, you shouldn't have voted for Donald Trump a second time, or that we need more political assassinations so that conservatives are afraid to speak on college campuses. If you said this while a registered Republican, the speed at which your life would become a Truman Show And, the cute barista you meet at Starbucks asking you out on a date is actually working for the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And every new friend request is coming from a Fed from a different federal agency.
Yes.
That was every group has extreme elements. We saw this with like Atomwaffen division and stuff in the early Trump era, where you'd have these Fed posting groups. But everyone knew don't go within this, don't go anywhere near this with a 10-foot pole, or your life will become a federal government Truman Show, because this is a Fed group. Only Feds talk like this. This is an entrapment operation. That was never done to the political left in this country. Political extremism, domestic extremism was always defined by this FBI since the beginning of the Trump era as being Trump supporters or Republican conservative sentiment. And so that developed a very strong culture within the online right and within online communities that you don't talk like that, or else you will, even if you're not a Fed, everyone will think you're a Fed. But there was none of that against Antifa. There were none of these entrapment operations, Feds, penetrating these groups and setting them up for all sorts of entrapment schemes. And those things have their own civil liberties concerns, with that strategy. But what I'm trying to say is that there have been no brakes on those trains. When you see these statistics like this YouGov survey that came out yesterday showing that 25% of the far left, people who identified themselves on the farther end of the progressive spectrum, 25% endorse political violence or assassination as a means to accomplish their political goals, whereas it's 3% of the self-identified far right. When you see this just enormous gap in the endorsement of political violence, I think a lot of that has been because the way federal law enforcement has targeted incitement to violence has been a purely partisan phenomenon targeting the right. And you saw this set up not just by the Christopher Wray FBI or by the Merrick Garland Justice Department or the Mayorkas Joint Terrorism Task Force, but you saw this even with, they put John Brennan and James Clapper in charge of a domestic extremism intelligence group to explicitly go after right-wing conservative groups. We're just seeing right now the Arctic Frost document releases by Chuck Grassley today showing that the FBI went after Turning Point USA and subpoenaed all of their internal records just for challenging the efficacy of voting machines. None of this was done to Antifa. None of this was done to Trantifa. If that function exists at all in the FBI, it has to be turned around now. Or at least there has to be some period for the next 12 months, for the next 18 months. You can time box it. But so that when these extreme elements of these cultures cross that line into incitement to violence, which is a very different thing than political speech, that the force of federal law enforcement is felt on their necks the same way it was felt on ours. And I don't mean that in a literal sense, but in the sense that we know never to go near that stuff. And anyone who talks like that becomes instantly ostracized.
That's right.
On the other side, it gets glorified because there's no brakes on the train from federal law enforcement. And all of these, at Discord, at Blue Sky, on Reddit, all of the trust and safety teams are run by them. So there's no, when there is incitement to violence, or you say Alex Marlow next, Mike Benz next, Andy No next, Matt Walsh next, that's not considered incitement to violence. What's considered incitement to violence is anyone who says, actually, you shouldn't do that. And that's like, so what I'm saying is this needs to be a full-scale effort at the federal law enforcement level, at the funding level, at the civil society funding of alternatives institutions. And also at the global level, because as we were talking about this Armed Queers group, what you've seen, and part of the reason that I believe that Antifa and Trantifa have been allowed to grow so big despite being so militant and openly endorsing political violence is because that has been a useful instrument of statecraft for the blob, for the State Department, the CIA, USAID, the U.S. Institute of Peace, there are tens of thousands of NGOs, for boots on the ground to stop right-wing populist movements around the world by any means necessary. And this is just, and I kind of want to lay into this point with some of our remaining time, but I can pause because I know I've been talking for a while, but I wanted to get into the global nature of this.
No, that's what I want. That's what my audience wants too. And I think that's where I think you can help us, Mike, is to understand what the government should be doing, because we're seeing a rapid radicalization, and it is Trantifa. There's a violent death cult within the trans world. It's not all trans, but there's a lot of them. And Antifa is constantly trying to prey for young lost people online. That's a fact. The government obviously was completely unaware of this person's radicalization against Charlie, which is irresponsible, but it's also, I don't know if it's something that is to be expected. And then we saw earlier in the week, Pam Bondi flirting with, beefing up hate crime legislation, which is, I know, something Charlie was against and is not. It feels like a rough draft. I don't know why she feels like she brings her rough drafts out to national news. She does this all the time. I can't imagine that's where the focus goes. But what does the government need to be doing to make sure that we're actually trying to use power, and we've got the power right now, to try to make sure that that we got a hold on some of these people?
So I'll address those two things in reverse order. On the Pam Bondi quote about hate speech, my hope there is that she simply, when she said that, did not have the kind of lexicon or kind of linguistic fluency to appreciate the nuances in this space, and that kind of like Trump hijacked the term fake news that started off as a kind of left-wing talking point as a means to discredit right-wing news institutions, that her latching onto that phrase hate speech was just kind of not having the kind of, First Amendment academic jargon 101 around the thorny collateral damage with pursuing things along those grounds. I know that earlier today she clarified the remarks to talk about, that kind of speech that crosses the line into incitement to violence. Obviously, in which case you don't need to use the term hate speech at all, because you're just talking about incitement to violence. But I think that was probably just a moment where she didn't have the rhetorical fluency to appreciate the kind of alarms that go off in centrist and conservative minds when you use that language. On the international level, what I'll say is this. We have been in an undeclared second Cold War since Donald Trump began his campaign to run for president against right-wing populist movements around the world. The Cold War from the 1940s to the early 1990s was against left-wing communism. And our foreign policy establishment, our national security state, engaged in many noble endeavors to wage that Cold War on behalf of the free world, but also engaged in many ignoble and covert actions that worked with some very dirty groups to accomplish those means when they could not be accomplished cleanly, including working with organized crime groups, so-called right-wing death squads, for example, in El Salvador and Nicaragua, dirty groups who were armed, that served as boots on the ground, who had, what the U.S. Institute of Peace calls a high risk tolerance and a useful willingness to get arrested, and to engage in illegal activities such as blocking roads, blocking railroads, shutting down highways, bombing buildings. This is something that our foreign policy establishment, coming into the Trump administration, defined as nonviolent action. For example, if you look at the program director for the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is a U.S. government agency, their program director for their Center on Nonviolent Action, which works with these kind of Antifa and Trantifa groups, they defined violent property destruction as nonviolent action because they define violence as bodily harm. So you're allowed to bomb police precincts, you're allowed to bomb pipelines, You're allowed to, blow up police cars as part of effectively U.S. foreign policy doctrine. But you need radical, crazy people to do that, which is why you see the State Department and USAID and the Central Intelligence Agency and all of their different NGOs working deliberately with very, very radical groups, often who have kind of psychological derangement or extreme grievances against their government. And this has been bipartisan. The transgender community has been funded by the Republican foreign policy establishment when they serve as a useful hedge against governments that the Chamber of Commerce has wanted to depose. I published about this last year, for example, in Bangladesh. The Republican CIA front, called the International Republican Institute, which is the Republican branch of the National Endowment for Democracy, which was the brainchild of the Republican CIA director William Casey in 1983 and his right-hand man Raymond Green, who was the head of CIA propaganda and disinformation for 25 years before he drafted the legislation that resulted in the National Endowment for Democracy. The head of the National Endowment for Democracy for 20 years told the Washington Post that they exist to fund the groups that are too scandalized when it comes out they're funded by the CIA. And so the endowment was created to fund the groups that don't want to get caught taking CIA money. But they have a Republican branch called the IRI, which the Gray Zone published these internal documents. And regardless of what you think of the Gray Zone, the fact is the documents are the documents. And that was the IRI's. So the Republican CIA's baseline assessment submitted to the State Department about how to swing saying that we can't win the election in Bangladesh fair and square, so we need to induce destabilization, and proposing grants to the transgender community in Bangladesh who had their own beefs with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. What they wanted was the petroleum and U.S. military bases in Bangladesh that the Prime Minister was at war with Hillary Clinton about and the like. But effectively, they were funding the transgender dance festivals, the transgender arts and culture centers, the transgender gender ideology centers at Bangladeshi universities. And all of this goes to fund not rank and file transgender people. This goes to fund the organizers. This goes to fund the activists and the people who are boots on the. This is like when we do food programs in Somalia, and what we're really funding are the warlords and their paramilitary operations. We were funding a color revolution, a protest and riot movement in Bangladesh through funding the transgender community who had a beef with the populist government. That's the same thing that we do all over Central and Eastern Europe. We fund these Antifa groups. If you look at what's happening right now with the Green Party in Germany, the State Department and USAID funded tens of millions of dollars to these Green Party groups who then act as, these kind of brown shirts to break up meetings from the AfD or to use violent threats or to go after them using their connections in law enforcement. You saw the same thing with funding of Antifa groups in Spain against the Vox Party, in France against Marine Le Pen, and in Italy against the Matteo Salvini movement in 2017, 2018. And when you see this coming from State Department and USAID grants and NED grants and the like, and you understand all of these are vectors for the intelligence community and covert statecraft to influence the rise and fall of political movements, what I would like to see right now, on top of the defunding and on top of the conditioning of grants to colleges and universities, I want the ODNI to declassify every classified document of the Central Intelligence Agency, the USAID, State Department, whoever is host to the operations with Antifa around the world. We know, for example, the CIA was working with Antifa in Syria. Antifa had boots on the ground military operations to depose Bashar al-Assad between 2011 and 2016 as part of Timber Sycamore. I want to know, was the CIA working with Antifa in Germany? Were they working with them in Spain? Did this go beyond State Department grants? Was this coordinated? When you look at the OPSEC that Antifa has, anyone who's in the trenches of this will tell you they have military level OPSEC in terms of the the passwords and access and secured communications and obscuring of leadership models. I mean, and how closely, for example, in Portland, in Seattle, it looks like the ties are with Fort Lewis, the psychological operations base, and our port to the Pacific. There are very, very strange statecraft, intelligence, and military ties to the paramilitary side of Antifa. I want all of that declassified. I want declassified at the ODNI level, at the CIA level, at the USAID level, at the State Department level. They gave out grants, hundreds of millions of dollars of grants to all of these groups. I want to see the communications between the grant coordinators and the recipient groups. I want to see their milestone achievements. I want to see if they bragged to USAID about riots and shutdown of political speech around the world. I want the names of all the different riot organizers for these Antifa groups around the world. I want that to be made public, and I believe that will also help make the case to colleges and universities that you are hosting what is effectively a global paramilitary terrorist network, and that might help convince some of these administrators about the necessity of reforming domestic colleges and universities.
Okay, so how do we have a university system, and we want to have a university system so that we can innovate in certain ways to make sure that we have the cutting edge medicines, things like that, technologies, and the universities can be useful for that stuff, or maybe not. Maybe that moment's ended. What do we do to have a university system or not, or replace it, given that they really are just hubs of radicalization for people, and they're also deeply unsafe for people with viewpoints that are not aligned with the global left?
Well, the first thing is you have to reorganize the economic structure. That's a lot of the radicalization just follows the money.
That's
right.
Right.
For example, every major college and university has these, extremism mapping programs, and it's all to study right-wing extremism. I mean, just go on usaspending.gov and put in the phrase study right-wing extremism, and you're going to find probably 200 colleges and universities, not just the majors like Harvard and MIT and Stanford and the like, but you're all the way down to the little ones. It is an industrial complex funded with federal grant money, and I know that there has been the beginning of that process being cut back, but it needs to be exorcised completely. And what you need to do is you need to fund effectively the reverse apparatus to achieve some sort of ideological neutrality, to the effect that if you're going to fund one thing, you have to fund the inverse as well at that university. If you're going to say, okay, federal grant money to study extremism, you can't just have it selectively be to study right-wing extremism. Even the National Endowment for Democracy, at least, which is just a straight up CIA front, at least had the dignity to create two different partisan branches of it so that on the whole, the institution has some sort of, canceling out so that one side of the other or the other doesn't completely dominate and make the entire institution organizationally hostile. But I think as well, their funding of alternative and parallel institutions. I think what Ron DeSantis is doing right now in Florida in terms of trying to reform universities and what's happening with, for example, the new College of Florida, where they have Chris Rufo on the board of trustees, where I think even the University of Florida itself now has a new Freedom Center that's being funded in order to try to, make it so that there are opportunities for folks on all sides of the political aisle to pursue political science and international relations in a way that has schools of thought that are different from what the institution might do on its own. I think that Texas could run with that model. I think Tennessee could run with that model. I think Ohio could run with that model. And even the very economics. I mean, the most extreme people are at these universities are the administrators. Who
That's right.
Is
absolutely
you
right.
and I.
The students don't show up radicalized, and that's the whole problem. And that's what
even Tyler Robinson, by all accounts, what we're learning, and the facts are not final here, but he came from a Republican family. And appeared to be a normal kid in high school, and all it took were a couple years at the ideological extremism factory of American colleges to turn him into a cold-blooded, broad daylight assassin.
Okay, so Mike, the last thing before I let you run, it's always great to catch up. We should just make sure we're doing these regularly, and I take notes, and hopefully the whole audience did too. But tell me about just the nature of the extremely online, the extremely online nature of this individual who follows a pattern now. We saw an extremely online massacre of the children while they prayed in Minnesota. Thomas Crook seemed to be extremely online individual. And we have free speech in this country, but also these forums, particularly for young males who have a lot of time on their hands, they're hanging out on these things, and some of them do think Twitter is real life, but it's not Twitter. It's Reddit, it's Discord. What's our path to dealing with this, considering we have a First Amendment, we like the First Amendment, we love the First Amendment, but it's also people are just going on these platforms and they're getting these crazy ideas?
Well, the solution to that is Turning Point USA. I think a lot of the reason that you have these kind of extreme pockets is because there is no counter voice to talk people out of being completely extreme or irrational. And Charlie was building effectively the antidote to that when he was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
You do have. I have an opinion on this that some folks may take issue with this.
No,
but
I want to hear it. I think this is a really hard one.
I do believe that in the modern era, your online life is often more real than your real life.
Completely
and your real life is often only real to the extent its realness is actually moderated and depends on your online life in many ways. I remember seeing in 2020 that YouTuber had replaced astronaut and NBA player as, what high school freshmen said they wanted to be when they grow up. Your social rank in real life, who sits at the cool kids table at a high school and a college is dependent in many respects, is at least moderated by how popular you are online, on Instagram, on TikTok, on all the your different channels on YouTube. And it is your online identity and your rank within online communities determines in many respects your social rank in real life. And that is, I think, just an inescapable part of, the social media era. It's, that is simply something that has to be culturally contended with. But what that results in is when people do not have a kind of organic mainstream skill set, they're not the best at pottery, they can't build an online following that way, or they're not the best at basketball, or cultural commentary, or gossip or whatever. They will turn to the niches that accept them, that they feel like they have a natural voice in, and there is a kind of tournament structure to try to become the most influential or the most, and a lot of that requires attention grabbing, doing something that makes a cultural imprint, whether that's organizing protests or being the most extreme in opinions. And so it does lead to this kind of cultural competition to be the tallest sunflower in that community. And when those communities are inherently, violent promoting like Antifa, what you get is this kind of race to the bottom to see who can be the most extreme anti-fascist, who can take the most extreme direct action. And that results in this kind of, Tyler Robinson type, peer class.
And I think what we're going to find as we investigate where this guy hung out online, I think we're going to find some extreme rhetoric, but I think we're also going to find some normal stuff showing that some people in his chat group and in his orbit aren't Antifa terrorists. Some of them are just going to be normal people just shitposting. Like that's what we're going to see. And there's a weird phenomenon where I feel like some people, depending on talent, social development, whatever it may be, brain power, are not going to see the difference. And some people are just going to not tell when the online role play is fake, and it's not real. Because for Tyler Robinson, it was very real. Now for Charlie Kirk, it's very real. And that's the scary thing that we need to counter. And I just don't have a lot of faith that we can. So, I mean, Mike, we got 2 minutes here. The federal government obviously has got to investigate this, but is there anything that can prevent something like this going forward? I think basic stuff, just physical safety, bulletproof glass, drone surveillance when you go to outdoor events, it should be automatic for conservative speakers. But ideally, these people aren't getting radicalized without at least federal government being aware of it online.
Right. And I think your point about the nuance there is very important for policymakers, for law enforcement, for public speakers on these issues. I completely agree. You're going to see a lot of tourists. You're going to see a lot of lurkers, a lot of normal people, a lot of people who may see this rhetoric fly across their group chats and just not be cool with it, but not necessarily speak in opposition. And you do have to protect political speech, even extreme political speech, as long as it doesn't cross that line into incitement to violence. I think in this moment, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit on the incitement to violence. I mean, just from what I've seen already. I mean, the sort of thing where you're saying, kill this person. Someone should kill this person. That's a very different thing than saying this person sucks. He's a Nazi. These are things that are obviously dehumanizing, but that's not a law enforcement matter. That's not something for federal government public policy. That's the rough and tumble of democratic discourse and politics. But when you're talking about inciting assassinations and calling for assassinations, every bit of that side of discourse has to be completely purged.
All right, Mike Benz Cyber, Benz with a Z on X, the Everything app, which you guys probably subscribe to him if you're listening to my show. But Mike, where else can people go to support your work, which is so important right now?
You can find my video archives on YouTube, Rumble, Instagram. I'm everywhere. So Mike Benz Cyber, and thank you, Alex, for being nuanced and firm at the same time on all these issues.
Thank you. Yeah, and you helped me a lot, Mike. So it means a lot to me that you're here, and I want to keep making this a regular thing on my show because it's very educational, and we need that alternative online education for people because they're just not getting this is the type of stuff that's very clarifying for people, and I don't know which university or which major I would sign up for to get this information, and this is the information I would actually want. So thank you, Mike, and thanks to all of you in the audience. Thanks to Misty and John Cassio for pulling clips. Talk to you tomorrow.